Hey everybody, Mr. Bruss here with another recap video. Today we're recapping our biology class from Wednesday, September 16th. And so we did a few things in class today, and I just was going to go over each in turn. So I'm going to share my screen because we started off class with our graph of the day, and I'm going to get ourselves to the graph of the day here. Unfortunately, for a lot of the classes, we weren't able to spend too much time on this because we had a lot of ecology content that we needed to get to, and that's the kind of the heart and the core of this unit that you're going to be assessed on. But we didn't want to lose track of kind of exposing students to graphing and what data looks like, as well as to different ways of how science might look and who's doing it. So we started off with this graph of the day where we were looking at sea ice extent in the Arctic, and we talked a little bit about X and Y axes, and we dove into that a little bit. And I won't review that much here because I thought we did a nice job of kind of just hitting the top parts of that in class. We then kind of didn't really get to focus, but we mentioned Dr. Kyle Elliott, who works in, if my thing doesn't, works in the Arctic and way up north in Canada. And we talked that like science doesn't always have to be just sitting in a lab doing experiments, that you can be investigating these animals out in the field. And your laboratory might look something like this if you're out there. So it was cool. We mentioned a couple things about what Dr. Elliott studies. And then from there, we moved on to kind of the heart of what we were talking about in class, which was two things in class today. One, we reviewed the graded practice number 3, which was the introduction to food chains. And then we did an in-class practice, an ungraded practice, where we kind of dove a little bit deeper into the organization of an ecosystem, building off of what we learned about food chains. And so what I'd like to do in two parts to this video, is the first part I want to look at what we talked about the graded practice. So I'm going to go over that first, and I'm going to share from my iPad here and move on to the first part of what we talked about at the heart of today. So I'm going to hop over to Notability here. And this was that graded practice that students had, graded practice number 3, food chains and food pyramids. And the first thing that students were asked to do is to look at this picture of this African savanna here with a kind of a complex ecosystem sort of cartoonishly drawn all into a small space so you can see the different parts. And what students learn from this video here is kind of how a food chain is organized. And we talked about how these arrows represent the flow of energy. So energy flows from the sun to the producers. Then it flows from the producers to the animals that eat them. And then it flows to the animals that eat the animals that eat the producers. And so we talked about if you worked backwards with these arrows, the lion eats the giraffe eats the trees, and then we joked the trees eat the sun. No, it doesn't make sense. That's why scientifically, it's a little bit more robust, a little better to talk about the flow of energy. And then we talked a little bit about, yeah, that makes sense. The things you eat give you energy. Like if I'm low energy before lunch, I need to eat a little bit of food so that I have more energy, right? It comes from our food. So I feel like we did a pretty good job of explaining that. One thing I will mention in this picture is there are a number of different food chains that exist within the savanna here. So you might have picked grass, zebra, cheetah, right? Because the grass is a producer, the zebra is a primary consumer that eats the grass, and then the cheetah is a secondary consumer that eats the zebra. So as long as you had that structure to it, your food chain would be fine, okay? From there, we moved on to the next part of the assignment, which was, it was kind of twofold. One, to show that When we add decomposers in there, it changes our food chain more to a cycle of nutrients. And we talked about how organisms, a lot of organisms in an ecosystem take small molecules and put them together into larger molecules to make us kind of who we are. Plants are a great example of that. They take a small molecule of carbon dioxide and with the energy from the sun, put it together into sugar. And they can use that for fuel, and they can string sugars together to make the plant material itself. So we talked about that can't exist forever in an ecosystem. There needs to be something that breaks down those macromolecules after that organism has died and puts those nutrients back into the ecosystem. And that's really the role of decomposers there. So we put our picture of the decomposer there. We showed how you can do that with some of these cool notability tools. I won't show them right here. I think students have those. Then the second part of this was naming the different components of a food chain. So we started with the thing that makes its own energy there is known as the producer. And we talked about, you might also hear the word autotroph. So auto means self, and troph kind of refers to the energy or the food. So it makes its own food. But we talked about in this class that we're just going to use that word producer, so we don't get caught up in the vocabulary. And if we get caught up in that, we sometimes lose sight of what we're really trying to do. So producer works just well for us. And the thing that eats the producer is a consumer. It consumes the plant. It needs to get its energy from the plant. And since it's the first animal that consumes the plant, we call it the primary consumer. And I think students probably then realized that the animal that eats a primary consumer, we call a secondary consumer. And we already talked that the elements, the fungus, the bacteria that live in the soil are the things that break down these organisms once they've died. And those are called decomposers. So that was kind of our chain to a cycle. The last part of the homework we got at was a kind of a more complicated way of organizing an ecosystem. And because there's a few elements to this, and we call this the energy pyramid. It might be called a food pyramid or a trophic pyramid. And again, trophic referring to that sort of energy or food. And we talked about in a pyramid that simply the bottom layer of the pyramid is always the producers. And the next layer up in the pyramid is the primary consumer. You can see I wrote one consumer there. I couldn't find the little degree sign to make that primary consumer. And then the level above the primary consumer, in this case, up at the top, is the secondary consumer. In this particular pyramid, I kind of blacked this out, and I guess I could have dropped down the top there, but just pretend that black part doesn't exist. So we have producers at the bottom, then primary consumers, and then secondary consumers. That I think is pretty straightforward. And then we got to the point of, well, why didn't you just make that a ladder? Why make this a pyramid? Well, what the pyramid represents is that there are way more trees, there's way more producers than there are primary consumers, than there are giraffes. And there's way more giraffes than there are lions. And that's why you kind of get this funnel, this pyramid. And we talked about how I'm looking out my window right now, south of the building at this huge forest out here on the other side of Military Ridge Trail. And I know there's primary consumers in there, but I don't see any of them. I just see the forest. That's the biggest mass. And there's a lot less primary consumers. And then there's even fewer secondary consumers. And we talked about this is if you ever watched a nature video, you can see these huge forests, maybe out on the savannah, lots of foliage, and then maybe a herd of giraffes, migrating or running away from a predator. But the herd of giraffes isn't bigger than the entire forest, but it's a herd. There's a lot of animals in there, dozens of animals. And then in that same nature video, you never see a herd of lions. There aren't dozens of lions tracing, right? There's a few. Usually they kind of focus on a family. And so that's a way to help remember that there are fewer, as you move up this pyramid, there are fewer and fewer organisms. The ecosystem can sustain less. Well, and that's in a stable ecosystem. If there were ever more lions than amount of energy of giraffes, so there were more lions than giraffes, those lions would starve, right? Assuming that giraffes were the only thing they could eat. But if there was more lions than there was things for them to eat, then those lions would starve and their population would decrease while the giraffe population increased, and this pyramid would form itself back again. Super specifically, we talked about that what happens, why might this happen in such a steep pyramid? Well, when a giraffe eats a tree, if it eats 1,000 calories worth of plants, only 100 calories of that 1,000 actually goes into making muscle and fat and growth for the giraffe. The rest of the 90% is lost as heat. And that's because giraffes have to run away from predators. They have to travel to the next tree. Their hearts are beating to keep oxygen and blood flowing. So there's a lot of things a giraffe needs to do to stay alive. And that energy then gets burned off and lost as heat. And then so the giraffes have lost a lot of the energy. And now the lions that eat the giraffe, the same things happen. Lions need to chase their food. They need to go back to their, dens at night. Their hearts are beating. So 90% of the food that they eat, 90% of the giraffe meat that they eat, that energy gets lost as heat, and only 10% actually goes into growing the lion, making it bigger, or saving up energy for reproduction. So that was the homework. I hope that made sense to everyone. So from there, we were, 45 minutes of class. We quickly moved on to the in-class practice assignment. And that was in Notability. I'm going to pull up Canvas here just so I can hopefully get a chance to show where we got to this. So I clicked on my Bruss biology class, and I'll try to make this from a student's perspective. So the student view is right here. And now from student's view, if you look at Ecology Virtual Day number 4, that's Wednesday. If we click on that, you can see the fourth thing was in class, we were going to work on food chains and pyramids. So I'll click on that. And there it was, and you can send this out to Notability. So if I click at that up there, that box with the arrow heading out, and I click to copy to Notability. There it is, copy to Notability. Then I can create a new note in Notability, and I can work on this from there. And I've created a number of these in Notability. So I'll come back to one that we were working on in class. So, that's maybe not the prettiest of them. Let's see here. This one looks a little better. Okay, so we started in class, and first thing we were hoping students noticed is, oh, right up here, it's a food chain. We just talked about food chains. And in this food chain, the producer is the lettuce, and the energy flows to first the green fly, then the ladybird, then the thrush, then the cat. And if we were talking about this in sort of common everyday language, we would say the cat eats the thrush eats the ladybird, and the ladybird eats the green fly, and the green fly eats the lettuce. And then again, in our scientific language, we would say energy flows from the lettuce all the way through to the cat. And that actually got at our first sort of question here. What does the arrow mean in a food chain? It means that's the way energy flows, right? A kind of a silly way that they say in one of the Amoeba Sisters videos is you can imagine the food, like the arrows going into the mouth of the thing that's eating it. But scientifically, that's the way the energy flows. And then we said, what's the producer in this? This is just to kind of get a little bit more practice with knowing the components of a food chain. The producer in this is the lettuce. And then we started getting into maybe some new terms for us. So name the third trophic level in the food chain. And now when we talk about that term trophic level, what we're talking about is a pyramid down here. And this is if this is an energy pyramid or a trophic pyramid, this is level number 1. This is level number 2. And this is level number 3. So producers occupy the first trophic level. Primary consumers occupy the second trophic level. And secondary consumers occupy the third trophic level. So that can get a little confusing. So name the third trophic level in the pyramid. Well, if lettuce is number 1, green fly is number 2, then ladybird is our third trophic level. Okay? So while the ladybird is at our third trophic level, if we were asked what is name a tertiary consumer in this food chain, a tertiary consumer is a little different. So lettuce is a producer. Green fly is our primary consumer. Ladybird is our secondary consumer. And the thrush in this food chain would be our tertiary, our third consumer. So we added thrush there. We had everyone chimed in and said, what is the ultimate source of energy that powers the food chain? We said it's the sun, right? And then I think maybe I'll see if I can undo some of the stuff we worked on in class so that you guys can see this again from the beginning. So then what we did is we said, okay, ecosystems sometimes have multiple food chains in them. And that's because there's maybe a couple different animals that live at that primary consumer, or something eats more than one thing. A primary consumer might eat more than one producer. And how, as scientists, can we communicate with each other about the complexity of this ecosystem? What's the best way to present that information in a kind of compact way that yet contains a lot of detail? And so you might not want to just have this list over here, this full list of food chains, because if it was a really complex ecosystem, this might just get to be a long list, and it's kind of hard to interpret all of it. There's like too much repeating of itself. So what we can do is we can organize these food chains, multiple food chains, and put them together and integrate them together into what we call a food web. And the way we do that is we just one by one look at these food chains. And so the first food chain here, grass to slug to thrush to cat, we can say, okay, energy from the grass goes to the slug. Energy from the slug goes to the thrush. That arrow is already drawn for us. And then the thrush, the thrush eats the slug, so energy goes that way. And then cats eat the thrush, so energy from the thrush goes to the cat. And from there, we have a nice little food chain that's represented right there. So pretty simple. We've just done one food chain. But if we add another food chain, we start adding a little bit of complexity. So in this next food chain, this one right there, again, slugs eat the grass, so energy goes from the grass to the slug. But in this one, foxes eat slugs. So I need to draw another arrow from slugs to the fox. And you can see the complexity increasing here. Now we move on to the third one. And this one, there's another animal that eats grass, and it's the rabbit. So energy also goes from grass to the rabbit. And in this one, the fox eats the rabbit. So we draw an arrow from the rabbit to the fox. And finally, we're on to our fourth food chain in this web, which is, again, grass to rabbit. Rabbits eat grass. But here we're bringing the cat, in addition to eating a thrush, eating a bird, the cat could hunt and eat a rabbit. And some of you maybe have seen that with your own cats. So now, so now we have these four food chains combined into this visual image that actually contains quite a bit of detail about this particular ecosystem. And then we went on to ask some questions about this ecosystem or about this food web. And what we're finding is that actually this does contain kind of a lot of information. So name the producer in this food web. Well, the producer here is the thing that makes its own food, and that's grass in this case. And then it was like, name a consumer in the food web. Well, there's a lot of consumers in this food web, right? A rabbit's a consumer, a slug's a consumer. Those are both primary consumers. Secondary consumers, we have thrush and a fox. And we even have a cat as a secondary consumer here, but what we'll see is also a tertiary consumer here. So there's a lot of consumers in this food web. We just named one of them, the slug. Also, you could ask from a food web, what eats rabbits? Well, let's follow the arrows from the rabbit here. A fox eats the rabbit and cats eat the rabbit. So that's another piece of information that's contained in this food web. And then the part F, what does a fox eat? Well, a fox, we follow the arrows backwards. A fox eats a slug and a fox eats a rabbit. Another piece of information contained in there. All right, so then we said, from the above food web, construct a food pyramid. And the first thing we did is we labeled our parts of the food pyramid. At the bottom here is a producer. The next level up is our primary consumer. Above the primary consumers is a secondary consumer. And up at the top here is a tertiary consumer. And this particular food web is a little complicated because you might notice that the cat here can act as both a tertiary consumer in that food chain, yet it's only a secondary consumer in this food chain. So I'm not going to ask students to kind of analyze anything that complicated on the test, but I just wanted to point that out. Oops, move over here, back it up. So we were able to get our primary consumers. Wait, how did grass end up here? We know that's not right, right? Grass is definitely not a primary consumer. So our primary consumers here are rabbits and a slug. So maybe we meant to add a slug in there. Oops, why did that not work? So copy that. Oops. And make sure we get our slug in here as our primary consumer. And then let's give an example of a secondary consumer. Well, a secondary consumer is something that eats a primary consumer. So I see that as a thrush, a fox, and a cat in this case. And it's a little confusing. So let's make it less confusing and let's just put the thrush and the fox as our secondary consumers here. So there is the fox, and we'll add our fox in here as the secondary consumer. Oh, that's fun. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's try that again. Let's try to get our fox in here. Oops. Oh, really fun. Okay. If I can do this, copy, and let's see if we can get a fox put in as our secondary consumer here. Oh yeah. Yeah, we got a little bit cut off, but I think you get the point. And then we would also add in our thrush as a secondary consumer. And there's the thrush as our secondary consumer. And in this one, I'm not going to go on, but you understand that the cat could be a secondary depending on one food chain or a tertiary depending on the other. Again, just kind of know that it moves up the pyramid is the important part. Now, we didn't get to this part. This was something that students were going to be doing on their own. And if they were running into any trouble, you as a student should go to the 3 to 4 p.m. office hours, which are over at this point. So hopefully you got some of your questions answered there, or the 8 to 10 a.m. Office hours that are provided by the teachers. But maybe this video could also be a resource for you. So I think since I have a little bit of time, I'll keep going through here and answer the rest of the questions for this in-class practice. And remember, this in-class practice isn't graded. It's for you to use as a resource as you study and expand your knowledge of ecosystems and prepare for that test. So here we're asking, what is the producer of this food chain? Well, we know that that's grass. Grass is our producer. What is the primary consumer? That is first here is our grasshopper. Grasshopper is our primary consumer. I'm actually going to expand this up a little. No, it's better just to have it like that. The grasshopper was our primary consumer. It eats the producer. That's what makes it a primary consumer. And now our secondary consumer is the frog. So what is it that eats the primary consumer? Well, frog eats the primary consumer, which makes it a secondary consumer. And we're just going, you might see this pattern here. We're just going right along. Is there a tertiary consumer? Yep. So a tertiary consumer in this one is the snake because it eats our secondary consumer. So put our snake in there. So snake is our tertiary consumer. And then finally, this food chain has a number of animals in it, and our eagle eats a snake, making it a quaternary consumer, or the 4th degree consumer. All right, and let me see if I can just get this for my own sake to look kind of nice and nicer in there. All right, so then name the herbivore and name the top carnivore. So this is just because it's in the pop. You're not going to be tested on what's an herbivore and a carnivore. I think we kind of have a concept of that as well, and it doesn't play in as much into understanding the dynamics of an ecosystem, but it's good to know. So the herbivore is like another word is an autotroph. An herbivore is something that eats our autotrophs, eats our producers. It only eats plants. Some of us are trying to be more herbivores in our own life, maybe. So in our food chain here, our herbivore is the thing that only eats plants, and that is the grasshopper. So the grasshopper is our herbivore. All right. And then it asks, there's a few things that are carnivores here that kind of eat other animals. The snake is a carnivore, and the eagle is a carnivore. I guess the frog would be considered an insectivore, not exactly a carnivore. But it's asking for the top carnivore, kind of that apex predator that has isn't prey to any other animal. And I think that is our eagle here in this food chain. So that top carnivore, our apex predator, is the eagle. Okay. And again, we didn't get a chance to do this in class. So here we are now with another food web that we're looking at. And again, it might look like a whole bunch of arrows, to the untrained eye, but now that we're starting to understand how these things are put together, we can pull out some information from this. So what are two foods that deer eat? So if I look at this a little closely and I follow the arrow, it looks like deer eat grass. And I work backwards from the things that deer eat, and deer eat saplings. So grass and saplings are the things that deer eat. So I'm going to copy that and paste it over there. So we have sapling, and deer also eat grass. So there's our answers to there that we were able to pull out that information. All right. And what does the wolf eat? Well, let's see here. Looks like there's about 3 arrows going to the wolf. So the wolf, as a top predator, seems to eat rabbit, deer, and mice. So rabbit, deer, and mice. So for this one, maybe I'll have a little better luck if I just type in the box. So I say rabbit. Let's make a little comma, deer, and mice. And I think I've gotten all of the rabbit, deer, and mice. Those are the 3 things that the wolf eats. Okay. So now it says this food web above has 16 different food chains in it. And can we identify 2 of them? And there's an example here where it says it looks like the sapling to deer to wolf is one of these straight lines right here that represents a food chain, right? I see another one right here, actually. I see grass to rabbit to wolf. And I wonder if I can be efficient here. And I can say grass to rabbit to wolf is another food chain that I see there. Copy that. And I've never tried this before. This is really trying to be efficient and not have to type. But watch this. What if I'm not, actually, that's not going to work. All right. I was trying to be too fancy there, but I did see that one, grass to rabbit to wolf as one of the food chains. So if I typed in here and I said grass, and maybe I make a little dash and an arrowhead, grass to rabbit to, let me see if I can make another arrowhead, to a wolf. All right, I'll put the keyboard down and I'll stretch this out so it looks like a nice little food chain there. And look at that, grass to rabbit to wolf. Grass to rabbit to wolf. Ooh, I'm gonna see if I can do another sneaky one here. How about grass to mouse to snake to hawk? Oh, we got a good one there. Grass to mouse to snake to hawk as another food chain. So I will put that in here, and I can say grass to rabbit to, I don't have the thing, to snake. Yeah, there we go. Once again, to hawk. That was a sneaky one in there. Oh, is that how we spell it? Oh, I see it. To hawk. All right, and let's stretch that out. And we got a cool food chain right there. Grass, let's make sure we have that. Oh, nope, it was grass to mouse. Oh, you guys maybe caught me there. Grass to mouse to snake to hawk. All right, let's edit this. Let's delete that. Yeah, grass to mouse. There we go. Let's see if that looks more right. So if I go up here and I say, is this a viable food chain? Grass to mouse to snake to hawk. Yeah, that looks like a better one. All right. So that was the in-class practice that we worked on today, and a little bit even more than we were able to get to in class. The other thing that I wanted to point out then in the last recap is there's another homework assignment today. Yeah, we're moving pretty quick in this unit. It's really important for students to stay caught up. And that homework assignment can be found listed underneath the ecology virtual day number 4. This is ecology graded practice number 4. And 4A, because I was getting confused. It's a whole Canvas issue, but it's right there, ecology graded practice number 4. If I click on that and I click through to this is due tomorrow. It should take about 30 minutes. And don't get hung up if you're not understanding it, but I think the video does a pretty good job of explaining it. What we're trying to get at is we did this sort of food chain, one thing to the other, but now we're getting towards this idea of interconnectedness. And we're going to see later, we're going to see how a whole ecosystem is interconnected, but we're going to start with just the relationship between a predator and a prey and how the population of one can affect the population of the other. And we kind of look at these in a thing called a predator-prey graph. And this YouTube video does a really nice job, I think, of kind of introducing this concept. And what I've done is I've created kind of a follow-along worksheet to kind of help you organize the ideas that you're getting from this video. And these questions should come right in order from the video. So I'm hoping that that is a nice introduction so that in class now we can expand on what we've learned. And tomorrow in class, we're going to review this assignment and then move on to creating our own, or interpreting a little bit more deeply predator-prey relationships of it from a graph, and before we create our own graph. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there. And that is the recap for today and a little bit of the insight into what we are going to do tomorrow. So I hope you all have a great night, and I can't wait to see you all back in class tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.